O man of two visions, close one eye and open the other. Close one to the world and all that is therein, and open the other to the hallowed beauty of the beloved. Bahá'í. Therefore, in this world, he must prepare himself for the life beyond. That which he needs in the world of the kingdom must be obtained here. Just as he prepared himself in the world of the matrix by acquiring forces necessary in this sphere of existence, so likewise the indispensable forces of the divine existence must be potentially attained in this world. Atubaha. So now I'll introduce our speaker for today, and just a reminder to save all your questions until after the talk when we'll have our Q&A session. And if you're new to the Baha'i Faith, or if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, you can fill out the Google form that I will put in the chat. So our speaker this week is Ms. Paymaneh Parhami, and her topic is The Seven Valleys, the Mystical Journey of the Soul. Paymaneh is one of the co-founders of Bahá'í Faith Modern Perspectives. She is an attorney who practices intellectual property litigation at a law firm in San Francisco. She has a JD from Berkeley Law School with a certificate in law and technology, and graduated cum laude from Columbia University with a bachelor's degree in political science and chemistry. Between college and law school, Paymaneh volunteered at the Bahá'í World Centre in Haifa, Israel for 1 year as the administrative assistant of the Department of Security. Currently, she is involved in organizing meaningful spiritual spaces for the youth of San Francisco. Paymaneh hopes to use her skills to follow the Bahá'í exhortation to be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age you live in and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements. And with that, I'll hand it off to Paymaneh.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. So today I'm talking about The Seven Valleys, which is a mystical work written by Baha'u'llah. But just before I start, in case this is the first time you're hearing about the Baha'i Faith, the Baha'i Faith is a world religion. It was founded in the mid-1800s by Baha'u'llah. And Baha'u'llah claimed to be the promised one that all the religions and traditions in the past had foretold. The mission of the Baha'i Faith is to unite the world, to get rid of all different kinds of prejudice, and to recognize that all human beings come from the same source, that no one is better than the other, and that the purpose of this world is to set ourselves up on this spiritual journey that has no end in time. So let me just get my presentation pulled up. Okay, so like I said, we'll be talking about the Seven Valleys. And just to kind of situate this in time, the Seven Valleys was written in Persian by Baha'u'llah. It was, written as kind of a poetic work. It was written around 1857 in Baghdad. It was actually written, so Baha'u'llah had spent 2 years in the mountains where he was basically in meditation and silence and prayer for 2 years. And when he returned back to Baghdad, Shoghi Effendi describes that period as one of the most prolific in Baha'u'llah's revelation, because that's when he revealed a lot of his famous works, one of which being The Seven Valleys. The Seven Valleys was kind of written in the style of this Persian poem by the Sufi poet Attar. That poem was called The Conference of the Birds. And so this work, Baha'u'llah wrote this in response to a question by a judge who was actually a follower of Sufism. And so that, that gentleman had asked Baha'u'llah some questions. So Baha'u'llah decided to kind of describe this spiritual journey of the soul in that same format of the Sufi poem, The Conference of the Birds. And so the style of the Seven Valleys is very poetic. A lot of the lines have rhymes and allusions to various things, and a lot of these are actually lost in translation. So what we're going to discuss is only a tip of the iceberg, in the sense that there's the substance, but also the style that's like very beautiful and has a lot of mystical allusions in it. So Shoghi Effendi, like I mentioned, he's the great grandson of Baha'u'llah, and he has described this work as Baha'u'llah's greatest mystical composition. And it's actually one of my favorite, if not my favorite, work by Baha'u'llah. So that's why I wanted to talk about it today. So like I said, this Seven Valleys is kind of a symbolic journey of the soul from, this world to the endless worlds of God, and as the soul is seeking to be closer and closer to the divine. So Baha'u'llah is explaining kind of the 7 metaphorical valleys or stages the soul needs to pass in this journey. In the introduction, Baha'u'llah says, some have called these 7 valleys and others 7 cities. So these stages, go in order, and the goal of the journey is to follow the right path, to abandon the drop of life and come to the sea of the life bestower and gaze on the beloved. So the first valley is the valley of search. So Baha'u'llah describes this valley as the first step a seeker has to take in his path. So this journey really starts with a seeker who's seeking truth and meaning. And Baha'u'llah explains what you need to do when you set on this path to look for truth. He says that the seeker must cleanse his heart and not follow the paths of his forefathers. And he says the steed of this valley, the horse that's going to get you through this valley is patience. So you're going to be searching far and wide. It's going to require a lot of patience to, really start on this path and seek out all the various sources of truth. He says that this stage is marked by restlessness and longing. And he says the most important thing is that the seeker has to abandon all of his preconceived notions and start this search with humility and perseverance. He talks about how it's just impossible to even start on this journey if you're clinging to the traditions of the past, what your parents have taught you about spirituality, what your community has instilled in you. It's obviously really difficult. Some people can get stuck on this path forever. This first valley forever, and never progress past it, because that's obviously, if you really think about it, a really, really difficult thing to do, even for us, even for people that say that they like to seek out truth independently. It's really difficult to eschew all these, the things that people have instilled in you, your community, your family. It's very hard. So, but that's actually the crucial thing that the seeker needs to do. And without that, you can't progress to the next valley. But if you do have this, humility, and if you do have a lot of patience and ardor, and you do pass through this valley, the next valley is the valley of love. So here, the seeker becomes consumed by a burning love for the divine, and the intensity of this love pushes the seeker to abandon all his attachments and embrace suffering as a path to union with the beloved. So the steed of this valley is pain. So if you remember, the steed of the last valley was patience, but this one's pain. Pain is actually what love is kind of marked by, if you think about it. Baha'u'llah says that love burns away reason. It causes pain, madness, and single-minded endeavor. He says that the fire of love burns away the material self, revealing instead the world of the spirit. And, what's interesting is he says in this valley, you're not seeking ignorance or knowledge. You're not seeking doubt or certitude. And in this valley, the seeker actually doesn't know right from wrong, guidance from error. He just has a single-minded object, and that's the object of his love. In this sense, it's the divine. This valley has, this quote I really like. He says, to merit the madness of love, one must abound in sanity. To merit the bonds of the friend, one must be free in spirit. So it's interesting because he spends this whole valley talking about how you basically have to be insane to be so consumed by this love. But at the same time, to even deserve that, you have to actually have a lot of sanity and rationality to even have reached this valley. So, like I said, this valley is kind of marked by pain. If you think about it, really loving anything always causes pain, whether that be a human being, your job, your house, your material possessions. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just the fact of what love is. Love brings expectations, and it brings pain, and it brings suffering, because you're always trying to be close to this thing you love, but you can't always attain that. But here, the object of our love is the divine. So everything is not important in comparison to that goal. And so if you traverse this valley, the next and third valley is the valley of knowledge. So here Baha'u'llah says the seeker actually attains the inner knowledge and recognizes divine signs in all things. The seeker begins to understand the interconnectedness of creation and sees beyond the veil of material existence. So the knowledge that Baha'u'llah is actually referring to in this valley is not material knowledge, but he talks about how this is the knowledge of God that we have to be seeking, and it's not based on our learning in, worldly sense. It's not based on our learning in school or what we've been taught, scientifically or by society even. This is kind of about our inner knowledge. Some might call it our, intuition, our sense of, meaning, our sense of self. It's our own inner wisdom. And he says that actually having pride in your own knowledge and accomplishments often bars people from reaching true understanding, which is the knowledge of God. So he spends a long time talking about how we have to not be prideful of our own knowledge. We have to kind of start from this humble posture of the fact that we don't really know anything and we're seeking knowledge, but our own understanding is so limited. We can't cling to what we think we know. And it kind of goes back to the theme of the first valley, which is eschewing all attachment to what other people have taught us, what we have taught ourselves, what we think we know. So Baha'u'llah says that in this valley, the seeker now begins to understand the mysteries that are contained within God's revelation and finds wisdom in all things, including when faced with pain and hardship, which the seeker actually understands to be God's mercy and blessing. Baha'u'llah actually says that this valley is the last limited valley. So the first three valleys are necessary steps, but there's still valleys of limitation. And this valley has, an interesting story where Baha'u'llah talks about this lover who has been separated from his love for many years. He is upset. He has just reached the end of his rope. He doesn't know where to find his love. And as he's wandering through the night, he suddenly sees these watchmen who start to chase him. And he's so upset because in the first instance, he can't find his love. And now he has all these watchmen running after him. So he's running and running, and they basically surround him on every side. And the only thing in front of him is this garden wall. And so he's, in despair, and he's cursing the watchman. He's saying, this is probably the angel of death upon me. This is like the end for me. And since he has no other option, he climbs the garden wall and falls to the other side. And there he sees his love actually with a candle. She's looking for a ring that she lost, and he's reunited with his love. And he's so happy and obviously so grateful that the watchman chased him and pushed him to jump over the wall and find his love. So Baha'u'llah says that, if the seeker was really, in this valley of knowledge, they would have seen the end in the beginning, and they would have actually blessed the watchman. They would have prayed on his behalf. He would have wished the best on him, because he would have known that that is going to lead him to what he's looking for. So he says basically, that's like a metaphor for this valley, which is we need to see the end in the beginning. Just because something outwardly looks like suffering and pain and, causing us despair, we have to have this inner wisdom to know that what we're going through, the fruits of it might not be apparent to our visible eyes, but we have to seek and, kind of come to terms with the understanding that things are going to be leading us to something else that might be a lot greater down the road. So, Baha'u'llah says, now, if the lover could have seen the end, he would from the beginning have blessed the watchman, prayed God on his behalf, and seen his tyranny as justice. But since the end was veiled to him, he lamented and made his plaint in the beginning. Yet those who journey in the garden land of true knowledge, since they see the end in the beginning, behold peace in war and conciliation in enmity. So, this can extend beyond just ourselves, obviously. We see in the world, there's a lot of strife and enmity and horrible things happening. But, if we seek this state of having true wisdom and knowledge, that sometimes calamities are necessary to push us to the next stage of evolution. So this kind of leads us now to the next valley, because Baha'u'llah says, of course, this is an amazing state to reach, seeing the end in the beginning. But he says, the people of the valleys above this see the end and the beginning as one. Nay, they see neither beginning nor end, and witness neither first nor last. Nay, rather, the denizens of the city of immortality, who dwell in the celestial garden, see not even neither first nor last. They fly from all that is first, and repulse all that is last. For these have passed over the worlds of names, and swift as lightning, fled beyond the worlds of attributes. Thus it is said, the perfection of belief in divine unity is to deny him any attributes. So this is really interesting because he says, it's really great if you can see the end and the beginning, but actually if you progress past this valley, you don't even see beginning and end. And then he says, you don't even see not even beginning nor end. It's completely past this, kind of duality, seeing, you can think of it in the world of time, time is linear because we think of it that way. It's not actually a objective truth. It's just a relative thing that we think about. So end, beginning, that's a really interesting thing that could probably be a separate talk, but yeah, time is not actually linear. But beyond that, he says that to actually believe in divine unity, you would eschew all attachment to these like attributes of end, beginning, first, last, this, that, otherness, basically. You eschew all attachment to all these labels, basically. So that leads us into the Valley of Unity. And so from here on out, these are the valleys that are limitless. The first three valleys were the limited valleys. Now we are past those kind of like limitations that are human and earthly limitations. So now in the Valley of Unity, the seeker sees creation not by its limitations, but sees the attributes of God in all created things. The seeker comes to realize that all things are one in the sight of God. Duality fades, and the seeker perceives a divine presence in everything, seeing unity in diversity. So Baha'u'llah says in this valley, the seeker is detached from earthly things, is not concerned with his own self, and has no ego. Instead, he praises God for all of creation. So again, once you pass the valley of search, then you have love, then you have knowledge, where you're seeing the end in the beginning. But then you realize everything is one. There is no contradiction. There is no, I have to go through this now to get to this later. There's none of those thoughts. There's no ego. There is no even what you're seeking. You're not seeking anything. Everything is one, and you have no separate will or ego separate from the whole. And so once you reach this realization, you pass into the fifth valley, which is the valley of contentment. This valley brings peace and acceptance. The seeker, content with God's will, no longer desires anything but God's pleasure. This stage is characterized by spiritual calm and surrender to divine providence. So if you think about it, the first few stages actually were characterized by longing and yearning, and you're searching, right? Like if you want to be on this path, the whole reason was you were searching after something. And then you have this overwhelming love for God, and you're trying to seek him everywhere. But after you realize that even all these ideas of will and longing are really your own limitations, you realize everything is already how it is. Creation is already unified. There's nothing for you to be looking for. So this is what lends us true contentment. Because obviously, as we've all experienced, nothing in this world really brings us true contentment. It never really, at least for me, maybe it is for you too, but nothing really leads to long-lasting permanent contentment. Even something you thought you were hoping for and wishing for, and it happens, it brings definitely temporary contentment, and a lot of changes in your life can be extremely positive, but no one single thing can bring us true contentment. But once you start to see that everything has this wisdom that's beyond yourself, and there's nothing really you're doing that's separate from other people, this really brings you contentment, because there's nothing for you to seek after. And Baha'u'llah says, even though someone may seem to outward eyes poor or subjected to suffering, he's going to be endowed with wealth and power from the spiritual worlds, and will inwardly be happy. So he says the true believer has happiness. And if you're not a true believer, you can't have happiness, because material things are just inherently transitory. They can't bring happiness. you invest your money in something, you buy something you think is super secure and stable. It's really not. I mean, everything's a risk in the material world. There's nothing stays. I mean, that's like a fact of the matter is we don't even stay. So there's nothing that is permanent in this world. But if you reach this state of true contentment and true understanding of the nature of reality, that's what really brings you happiness. So now once you've reached this state of just perfect contentment, you reach the valley of wonderment, the sixth valley. Here, the seeker is awestruck by the mysteries of creation and the infinite nature of God. The seeker realizes how little they know and are filled with wonder and amazement at the grandeur of the divine. So here, Baha'u'llah says the seeker is struck dumb, like mute and totally in awe of the beauty of God. The seeker is conscious now of the vastness and glory of creation and discovers the inner mysteries of God's revelation. Being led from one mystery of creation to the next, the seeker continues to be astonished by the works of God. So here, it's kind of, if you also want to think about it as like gratitude, having extreme humility and gratitude and just a sense of awe at how vast, incredibly vast. And if you study, obviously, astronomy, that's a clear indication of the fact that like we are truly less than a speck in the whole universe. We don't even know how big the universe is, but it's incredibly, incredibly vast. And the fact that it all works according to some laws, which we don't understand why or where they came from, or why is gravity? Why are there certain laws that everything adheres to? It doesn't really make sense. But if you start to understand that there's just this vast universe that we have absolutely, honestly, no idea, we can't really fully ever understand, but we can come to understand more and more. All we can really have is just this deep humility and appreciation and wonder. So finally, all these stages lead you to really the object of your quest, which is the valley of true poverty and absolute nothingness. So keep in mind, this is the valley of true poverty, not material poverty necessarily, but this is what Baha'u'llah describes as the true definition of poverty and absolute nothingness, which is the complete annihilation of self. You are poor of self, meaning there is no self, there is no separate person anymore. You're completely detached from the self and worldly things, and you reach a state of spiritual nothingness where only God remains. The ego is completely dissolved and the soul becomes united with the divine. So this is the furthermost state the mystic can reach, Baha'u'llah says. You are poor of material things. Now, this doesn't mean actually literally not having material things. It means not being attached to them. Of course, Baha'u'llah says he wants people to live in comfort. And he thinks material means can lead to the betterment of society, but only if you're not attached to them and don't ascribe them this like happiness and contentment that you think it's going to give you. But what you're really rich in here is spiritual attributes, not material objects. Like I said, Baha'u'llah says this is a state of the annihilation of self and God. But what kind of differs between some religious traditions or spiritual traditions talk about like a full literal union with God. Here, it's a little different. It's meant you're completely self-effaced, like you don't have a self and everything is God in that sense. You're not like a separate entity that's now becomes God. You're just completely void of self. And so in that sense, everything is God. So I think it's really interesting if you think of a journey, you usually think it's leading you somewhere. But this journey leads you to nothing, right? Leads you to absolute nothingness. So in that sense, it's like really interesting because it's like, why would you start on a journey to lead you to nothing? But in the other hand, you see Baha'u'llah says really having complete no attachment to self, no attachment to expectations, the material world is really what's going to lead us to true contentment and happiness. So that was a very brief recap of the seven valleys. There's a lot more in there. There's a lot of more metaphors and allusions and stories. And so it's available for free online on Baha'i.org. So I encourage you to go read it for yourself. That was just a brief overview of what the values are. And so, it's interesting because this whole 7 values is really about the individual's spiritual path. But in Baha'u'llah's writings, he talks about how it's important to have kind of a framework and a guide. And he explains that these manifestations of God, or these wise people that come from time to time, provide this kind of framework. So you can think of the 7 values as, obviously, nobody thought it was literal, but you can think of it as a metaphorical framework to help you think about like what are kind of the different stages you need to go through when you're seeking, I guess, enlightenment or union with the divine. And there could be, I would say most likely will be challenges on this journey. Baha'u'llah writes about how, especially in the first path, the first valley, the valley of search, there's a lot of people who are distracted. They get distracted. You hear claims that this will make you happy. This is the truth. This is the truth. So you'll be led with a lot of tempting distractions. Maybe you'll fall off the journey. Maybe you'll realize, no, I want to focus on this promotion, and that actually will make me happy. Like, no, having a certain amount of money definitely will make me happy. And in a sense, it's true. Being relieved of physical suffering definitely allows you to even focus on the spiritual journey. But at the end of the day, I think people who have chased those things realize at the end of the day, it doesn't really give them true happiness. So you might face a lot of distraction. You might face doubt that you can't really do it. I'm not cut out for this. I'm just not spiritual. I'm not enlightened. It's not for me. You might face some of these self-critical negative thoughts. You might face fear, fear that you're not going to do it right, that you're not one of the people that can achieve this divine, state. But just if you recognize that these things most likely will happen, these thoughts will come in your head, but at the end of the day, they're just thoughts. We have a lot of thoughts. Most of them are actually not true. They're not real. They're not based in reality. They're just thoughts. It's a pattern that we tell ourselves. So just realizing they're thoughts, and you can notice as your thoughts come in, and then just notice as they go out. There's also, this, like I said, 7 values is interesting because it's really just focusing on an individual spiritual path, which I think is very interesting. That's why I like it a lot. But a lot of Baha'u'llah's writings, a central purpose of his faith is to build these strong communities. And so I think something else that would help us in our spiritual journey is having communities, having people who are also trying to do this, people to lean on, to hold you accountable. And you can learn from what's worked for other people. So what does this actually mean in our daily life? The applications to our daily life, what's interesting is you could think of this as this like really convoluted, abstract work that it's like, okay, that sounds nice, but how is this really relating to my life? Like, obviously I can't do this. Well, Baha'u'llah actually says that these journeys have no visible ending in the world of time, but the severed wayfarer, if invisible confirmation descend upon him, and the guardian of the cause assist him, may cross these 7 stages in 7 steps, nay, rather in 7 breaths, nay, rather in a single breath, if God will and desire it. So on the one hand, he's saying these journeys have no ending. This is like a continual process forever, for the rest of our earthly lives and forever. We're always like propelled forward on this path towards God. But on the other hand, he says, you can reach them in 7 steps, 7 breaths, even 1 breath, like it could be a complete shift you have overnight. This isn't like something that's like, okay, it's going to take you 3 years and 6 months. And like every day you have to do a certain thing. Not necessarily. That could be true. And like I said, it is a lifelong process. But on the other hand, it could be a simple switch that you make, that you realize that you want to be on this, true path towards God. You want to kind of seek out these principles of like facing everything with humility. That's a simple shift you can make, where you can start to say, I don't really know that much. I think I know a lot about the world and people and why people are doing certain things, why certain things are happening to me. But if I really adopt, a framework of humility and realizing that there's just this vast universe out there that I really can't understand, So if you kind of make that mentality shift, it could happen, like he says, in even the blink of an eye. It's just a complete switch in framework. And Abdul Baha says that the seven values is a guide for human conduct, that one should search out one's own imperfections and not think of the imperfections of anybody else, to strive to be free from imperfections, and that nothing is more fruitful for man than the knowledge of his own shortcomings. So again, this is a very important point, I think, because, unfortunately, many religions or not religions, just any groups of people, they tend to hold other people to certain standards. But the Baha'i faith is not about that. It's not about holding other people to these standards. It's about holding ourselves and only ourselves. And there's many quotes about if someone has 10 bad qualities and one good one, to focus on the one. So again, this is not an opportunity or invitation to be judging other people, holding them to some certain standards you think are correct. This is about yourself. And Abdul Baha says, Abdul Baha is the son of Baha'u'llah. He says that nothing is more fruitful for us than knowing our own shortcomings and being aware of them. And I think knowing and being aware of our own shortcomings actually helps us be on this path, because it helps us to always stay humble. But it's also interesting to think of the seven values as a guide for human conduct, because like I said, it seems on its face to be a very abstract and mystical work that's kind of like, okay, I'll read this for fun, not sure how this applies, but this is actually a guide for human conduct. So like I said, this was a very cursory review of it. I really encourage you to read it for yourself. But every stage, every valley, if you view it as kind of an exhortation of what kind of attitude and mindset and spiritual framework you need to adopt, I think it's actually much more applicable than it would seem. So like I said, really the goal of this journey is to have a closer and closer and closer relationship with the divine. Through doing that, we attain these deeper insights, we attain inner peace, contentment, and just awe of the vastness of the universe, the miracle of us even being alive, being able to have this experience, being able to even ponder these things and have these reflections. I mean, we don't know currently of any other creatures that can do that besides humans. So it's really amazing that we're here. And I really like the seven values because it really helps you. It doesn't just, say these things in kind of a matter-of-fact way. It says it in a very mystical and poetic way and kind of helps you get into that vibe and that mindset. So thank you so much. Now we have some time for questions, but also you can email us and go to our YouTube channel if you have any other questions. We have a lot of topics that we've already had discussed. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Paymaneh, for your talk. I really liked the quote you shared about the valley of love. To merit the madness of love, one must abound in sanity. I actually have that quote on my home screen of my phone because I like it so much. So now we have time for questions, and we already have a bunch. So one is asking, could you please, or actually a few are asking this, could you please shed some light on what is the meaning and significance of the station of limitation of the first three values and the limitless values after that?
Okay, yeah. Well, obviously this is only my own opinion. I could be wrong and there could be other meanings to it, but my own personal opinion on what that means is the first three values are sort of like kind of still bound by the earthly and the material understanding of things. So, we all know what it means to search after something. We know what it means to be consumed by this love for something. And then to have knowledge of kind of the inner wisdom of things, the end and the beginning. But we're still within this realm of what we've been taught and kind of really a human way of thinking about things. Because what's really interesting is, we always in the Baha'i faith talk about how God is an unknowable essence, and it's just completely and vastly beyond human understanding. We always talk about that, but I think the significance of the limitless valleys is that there are these other planes of spiritual existence that are totally inaccessible to us. They don't comport with how we think about the world. Our human brains just, we can't even even concept of time, how time is not actually linear, but we can't even conceptualize that. Like, what does that mean? Like, is everything happening all at once? I mean, no, because again, you're still thinking about things in terms of time. So I think it's just kind of a metaphor for the fact that we're passing beyond what we know. We're passing beyond even framing things in a way of describing it. Because like the whole point he was saying is when you're passing through to the fourth valley, which is no longer having limitations, you're not ascribing attributes to anything. You're seeing the divine essence and everything. So there's no even describing God as loving or merciful or just. This is still very, 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 very limited. It's not at all coming close to, I mean, Baha'u'llah says no pen can even come close to describing what God is or what really is like the nature of reality.
Thank you. Another question asks, what do we have to understand about the nature of reality, which will lead to acceptance of our circumstances?
I mean, I think there's a lot of things. I think for me personally, what's helpful is to think of yourself as not having that much influence. I mean, it's like weird to think about it that way, but I think a lot of times we put so much blame and pressure on ourselves for trying to change things and trying to change the outcome. But if you really kind of go through this journey and realize there is this divine will, if you want to call it that, there's this will that's far greater than us. I mean, we don't even understand our own world, let alone the universe. So I think getting rid of that sense of like pressure on ourselves and of course you have to try to better the world and better your community and treat other people with kindness in the way, or even better than you want to be treated. But I think so obviously doing that's like a given, but beyond that, not putting so much pressure and intensity on ourselves to try to fix everything and fix situations, and to realize that just things happen, we're on this path. We don't know why. A lot of times things happen and we don't know why. And to just keep in mind that, the story of the watchman, that he had no idea. He wouldn't have known why the watchmen were chasing after him. He didn't know. So sometimes we're not going to know. We might not be wise enough to see the end in the beginning, but to just keep in mind life is long, it's short, but also long. So there are things that will happen that might be really great for us. They may not be, but that's just part of the world. That's part of growing and gaining all these attributes.
Thank you. Another question asks, how do you see all of these stages with the practice of meditation?
Well, I think, there are a lot of, practices in meditation that I'm not even qualified to speak about, but there are many kind of like similar, meditative practices that see kind of the point of enlightenment as like going through these stages, but they're, actually literally, in meditation, you can reach these stages of deeper and deeper concentration where you actually have these genuine experiences. Like it's not just a metaphor. You're actually having these experiences of becoming more and more concentrated in your mind and having like really deep insights that come from that. So this could be seen as, also a commentary on like meditation and the fact that if you meditate, obviously, I think you definitely, I think, need to meditate to be able to be on this path. I mean, how can you come to see the inner wisdom of all things and to see your thoughts as just thoughts if you're not meditating? I mean, I don't think there's a way to do that because our thoughts are running usually at 1,000,000 miles an hour in our head. So to really slow down and pause, like I said, there are many meditative practices that you should look into. I'm not qualified to speak on, but I think this is definitely a crucial component of being in these valleys is to meditate and to take time to slow down.
Thank you. Another question asks, concerning the annihilation of self, what do we call self or ego? Is it correct to say that it is an illusionary entity? Because it seems we are convinced we have our own independent existence.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think that's kind of an example of like moving beyond these labels. Once we see that there is no self, there is no self to let go of. That's actually another interesting way of thinking of these, latter valleys, which is there's no dissolving of the ego or the self, because what does the self mean? What is that? How is it separate from other people? And I think if you think of also like what is the self in the sense that the thoughts you have or the decisions you make, are they really from yourself, or are they just thoughts you're acting on, or are you predisposed to do that, or are you naturally gravitating towards one thing or another? A lot of times we don't make like these like grand decisions from like a place of like sitting and analyzing all the pros and cons. I mean, sometimes we do, but most of the time we're just like reacting and doing things, right? So what is the self? If you really come to see everything as one, there is no separate existence or separate identity that you have.
Thank you. One question asks, is there an English translation of the Seven Valleys book yet? And I'll just say, yes, there is. And if you want to find the writings of Baha'u'llah, you can go on baha'i.org/library. And for anyone watching on YouTube, we'll put in the description the link to the Seven Valleys. Another question is asking for the source of the quotation you read from the master that the Seven Valleys is the guideline for perfection.
Oh, that was from, let me find it. That was from the Promulgation of Universal Peace. I don't have the exact page number right now, but that's where it's from.
Thank you. Another question asks, please explain the distinction of the Baha'i understanding of nearness to God versus other faith traditions that talk about union with God.
Yeah, this concept, again, I'm not an expert in this concept. It's also explained more by Abdul Baha in some answered questions. But some people, in some traditions, it's kind of the idea is that you become God, kind of like on the spiritual journey, you are God, but kind of literally, so when we say that, it's like you are God in the sense that everything's God. There's no separate self, like we just talked about. But there are some traditions that I don't even remember exactly what it's called, but that see you as becoming honestly God, like everything's God in the sense that God is in everything, like the grass, the trees, but not in a metaphorical sense, in like a genuine literal sense. Abdul Baha talks about how Baha'u'llah's teachings are a bit different than that in the sense that things are not literally God. I mean, because again, God is something, it's just like a placeholder for something we can't understand, but it's more like there is no separate self. Everything is belonging to this essence that we have no idea what it is.
Thank you. Another question asks, how can we recognize the signs that we are progressing through these spiritual stages?
Well, I think obviously nobody can answer that but yourself, because it's going to be different for each person. But I think like some of the qualities we talked about, like on the first, in the first valley, having like true humility and kind of seeing everything from a fresh perspective. I think that's something that we can notice if we start doing that, because it's very easy for us to say we're open-minded, but we usually have very deeply held principles and ideas in our head. So I think like a simple practice could be when you're hearing a new idea, let's say that's in politics, or that's something you heard, in your field at work that you definitely disagree with, but coming at it like with fresh perspective and saying, okay, let me forget about what I know for now. Let me just approach this from a fresh point of view. And what do I think about it? And judge it very like on an independent minded basis. That would be an example of, and if you can start to do this and it becomes more and more of a pattern. Or in, the valley of knowledge where you're seeing the end and the beginning. I think, again, if you start to make a pattern out of it, like something really bad is happening to you, let's say, and you're like, okay, I have no idea why this is happening. It could be happening for no reason. It could be leading me to something better. I don't know. And you can reflect back on in the past when, seemingly bad things have happened to you. It may have led you to another path you never would have gone down. So starting to make like a proactive habit of it, it might not feel natural. It probably won't feel natural for many people, but to start to make a habit of approaching these things with just a different reaction. And it might not be your natural reaction, but the more you do it, the more it becomes like a habit in your brain.
Thank you. Another question asks, could you share some personal reflections or experiences that have deepened your understanding of one or more of the valleys?
I think, well, I really like the valley of knowledge. I like the story in it. Because I think that can apply to everybody. Like obviously everybody has bad experiences they go through. and kind of thinking like Baha'u'llah almost speaks of this person in the story as like, oh, well, like obviously if he would have seen the end in the beginning, he would have prayed for the watchman. And kind of if you think back on your own life, you'll see many situations where you're like, wow, I should have been grateful in that time, right? Because like not necessarily, it wasn't necessarily a pleasant experience, but it led me somewhere that I never would have chosen on my own. So, but then I think it's interesting to try to see like, what is Baha'u'llah talking about when you should even go beyond seeing things as neither first nor last, neither end nor beginning. I think that kind of leads into the next, the further valleys where it's like, there is sometimes no like thing that you can influence, things are just happening. I think the more we can just like let go and have contentment that, this is life, things happen. It's not always our fault. It's not always up to us to influence the outcome. I think for me, that's personally been something like really helpful because again, you get so caught up and everyone speaks about like your independent agency and like, do this, do that. Wow, you accomplished so much. Most of it's not us. It's just what's happening. It's just life, like you're just floating along in life. So yeah, for me, I think seeing myself as just like floating along in this world, doing the best I can, but not putting so much blame and pressure on myself.
Thank you. The Valley of Search describes a process of stripping away false attachments. How can we identify and detach from these distractions in our own lives?
It's obviously really hard and it's like at once could seem easy, but also a lifelong process. But I think maybe when we start to get like unhappy about something, which is actually frankly very often, because like it's like, oh, I'm thirsty. Okay, I drink water. Now I'm bored. Okay, let me go do this. Like, oh, now I have to go to the bathroom. Now I want to go to the beach. Now I'm too hot, it's too sandy. I have to go home. Like, now I have to cook dinner. I'll have to clean the dishes. Like, there's always like something next, right? Like, you're never like truly just happy. There's always, you got to be doing something else. I think asking yourself like, why? It's like, oh, right now I feel unhappy. Why? Or if this thing happened to me at work, why is that upsetting? Why? I think if you keep asking yourself why, and you're like, oh, well, because this job is my identity. Like, oh, really? Why? Could you do another job? Yeah, I guess I could, but I'm good at this. It's like, okay, so is that your identity? Like, why are you so unhappy? Why? And it's usually because we're attached to something, but identifying what those are, I think, comes from asking yourself why you're unhappy in certain situations. Because a lot of times, like if you say it out loud, it's kind of more basic and maybe ridiculous than you thought. Like you're just really, or like, oh, I just have to make enough money to buy this house over that house. It's like, okay, why? Like, okay, once you live in that house for a year, is it really that different than the other house? Like, what and why? Why are you so unhappy? Because you're attached to the idea of like this particular house will just make you the happiest you could ever be, right? So yeah, I think asking ourselves what our motives are when we're feeling unhappy is like helpful.
Thank you. We have a couple similar questions about the Valley of Search. They ask, how can we recognize when we are truly in the Valley of Search as opposed to simply exploring spiritual ideas on a surface level? And the second one asks, the Valley of Search speaks of the importance of sincerity in the quest for truth. How can we ensure that our search for truth remains sincere and not clouded by personal desires or external influences?
Yeah, I think that's like probably honestly the most crucial thing is, and I don't even think most of us can really fully achieve this, but to actually sincerely be seeking the truth is extremely difficult. And I think also, I think so personally, again, all of these things are my personal reflections on Seven Valleys, obviously, but I personally think reflecting and kind of saying out loud what our attachments are, what our biases are. It's like, oh, I'm reading the Seven Valleys. I really like it because part of it's because I'm a Baha'i. Like I believe in what Baha'u'llah says, like admitting that's part of it, or like, oh, this is not really resonating with me because it kind of goes against XYZ other belief I have. I mean, that may be a great thing, but just admitting out loud that like, this is your bias, this is where you're coming from, right? It's very difficult. I think very few people can truly like approach a situation truly with no preconceived notions. I would say honestly almost impossible, just the nature of being a human being, but we can try and get like much better at it. But I think just acknowledging to yourself, like, what are your biases in this situation? Why do you feel this way towards something? Most of the time, our feeling and judgment towards something is before we really have much facts, if any at all. So admitting them out loud is probably the first step.
Thank you. Another question asks, why do people see the search for truth as a convenience rather than an imperative? Why do we only look into things that interest us rather than those things that will challenge us?
Well, I think people usually grow when they have to, like when they're being chased by the watchman or something bad happens to them, because that's just, who we are as humans. We're not going to like actively seek out a really uncomfortable situation. Some of us might, and that's hopefully the goal, is to seek out situations that will help us grow and challenge us. But I mean, why don't we? Because it's not convenient. It doesn't feel good. We're tired. We have a lot on our plate. We want to just relax. We want to engage in just more simple pleasures. We don't want to constantly push ourselves out of our comfort zone. And that's okay to a certain extent. I mean, knowing your own limits is fine. You don't always have to be pushing yourself to do something uncomfortable. You can have balance. Baha'u'llah talks about moderation and balance in every single thing. I think that even comes to spiritual growth. It's like, okay, you grow a lot, you push yourself, you put yourself in these situations, and you can take a little bit to rest and recover and reflect. What did you learn from that? What do you wish you would have done differently? What will you do differently next time? So having periods of rest and relaxation is really important. But why people don't see it as an imperative is, like I said, usually we don't do uncomfortable things unless we have to, like we're not going to do something extremely difficult for no reason. So a lot of times people fall complacent in their life. And I think that we're all prone to this, falling complacent, but then you realize after a while, all the stuff you're doing is just not truly making you happy. Like it is for a little bit, but it's not truly making you happy. So I think people who then finally recognize that there's something missing, no matter what they do, that's when it really propels them on this path.
Thank you. Another question asks, how can we practically encourage others to embark on this spiritual journey, particularly those who may not be familiar with the Seven Valleys or mysticism or the Baha'i faith in general?
I think only through our own actions. Like I said, we should not tell anyone or encourage anyone. I think that's my own opinion. I don't think we should tell people to do anything or tell them what's best, because we have no idea. That goes against our own humility. I think and Abdul Baha and Baha'u'llah and Shoghi Effendi have talked about this. Like, words are honestly almost meaningless. The only way we can really impact people's behavior is our own behavior. You even see that with parents. It's like telling someone something's bad is not going to usually have that sink in. It's usually just through your own conduct, through your own example, because that's really what people are seeing. Like the words you say, most of the time you don't remember like what your friend said 2 weeks ago about something. It's usually, when you think about your friend, you think of just like the qualities they have. How do they conduct themselves through the world? Do you want to emulate that? Are you inspired by that? So I think inspiring others by our own behavior is really the best way.
Thank you. So I think that's all of our questions today. So I want to thank you again, Paymaneh, for your talk. I think this is a topic that a lot of us have been wanting to hear about, it seems like. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on it.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for tuning in and for your questions.
So now I'll introduce our speaker for next week. Our speaker next week is going to be Robert Mushrif-Zadeh, and his topic is Science and Art of Racial Justice. And again, these talks are every Saturday at noon Eastern Time, so you can invite your friends and family. And again, if you're new to the Baha'i Faith or if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, you can fill out the Google form that I will put in the chat. Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you all next Saturday. Have a great week. Bye.